for joining this Bright Blue Fringe event, which we're doing in partnership with Calor Gas. The title is A Heated Debate, Choice and Fairness in the Transition to Net Zero Home Heating. For those of you who don't know Bright Blue, we're an independent think tank for liberal conservatism. We're here to defend and improve liberal society. Our work is based around 7 major research themes, and we look broadly at domestic, environmental, social, educational and economic policy. If you're tweeting, because everyone tweets these days, please use the hashtags BrightBlue and CPC21 and do follow at WeAreBrightBlue. The event is being live streamed, so it is important when we come to questions after the speakers' introductions that you have a microphone when you ask the question, so people from outside can, or from wherever they are, can hear your question. And I will be taking questions virtually as well as from the audience. So in terms of this debate, obviously we now have the very major and ambitious net zero legal target by 2015, so net zero emissions for this country, and about a third, just under a third of the carbon footprint comes from the residential sector, from our homes, the way that we heat our homes. And we need to think about how we decarbonise our heating systems. So, and we need to do that obviously in a way which is just and affordable and provides choice for consumers with the different homes that they have. So it's a big challenge. There's financial, practical considerations around how you support consumers, and this debate is exploring that, because that's going to be a big thing, I think, for the coming decade, how we really decarbonise not only the way that we travel, but the way we heat our homes. So we've got a brilliant panel to discuss this. So we have Jerome Mayhew, MP, to my left, who is a member of the Environmental Audit Committee and Conservative MP for Broadland. Emma Gatten, who is next to him, who is the Environment Editor of the Daily Telegraph. Kelly Beaver, to my near right, who is the Managing Director of Public Affairs at Ipsos MORI. To her right is Guy Newey, who's the Strategy and Performance Director at Catapult Energy Systems, previously a Special Advisor in Government to the Energy Secretary. And then to my far left is Andy Parker, who is Head of Strategy and Corporate Affairs at Calor Gas. So I'm going to ask the speakers to speak for 5 minutes strictly, and then we'll come to the audience. So, Jerome, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's very nice to see everyone here. I hope you can all hear me. I'm just going to leave that there. Okay, so we're talking about home heating. Let's set the scene. Home heating costs about 14% of our entire emissions currently, are carbon emissions. So it's a huge part of what we're putting out there into the atmosphere right now. And that's just domestic heating. If you look at the built environment as a whole, it's about 40%. It's estimated it's about 40% of our carbon emissions are associated with buildings. So that's the embedded carbon as well as the emissions that are running them. So this is a massive issue. And if we're serious about getting to carbon net zero by 2050, then it's something we're going to have to address, and address soon. So there's 2 ways to tackle it. We're talking about heat here. Well, the first thing is use less of it. And the answer to using less of heat and the emissions associated with that is, of course, insulation. And then the second part is, once you've insulated, you reduce the carbon content of what's left. So I'm going to focus, probably rather unfashionably, on insulation, because it is the elephant in the room. The reason why people don't talk about it is because the public, we've been insulating our lofts for ages, haven't we? But we're not talking about fluffy stuff in the attic any longer. We're talking about the walls. We're talking about the windows and underfloor insulation. And this is really disruptive. You have to move out often in order to put this stuff in, and you have to redecorate afterwards, and it's really expensive. So on the government's estimation, they're talking about £5,000 per unit, per housing unit on average to do this. But the evidence that the EAC has received is that's unrealistic. And then it's closer to £20,000 to £22,000 per average house in order to install effective insulation. So in our conversation later on, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about how we insulate our houses, which is more important actually than how we heat them. And we can help around the edges, but we're talking about significant capex in improving your housing. So for owner-occupiers, you can start seeing how that could work, but there are harder to reach parts of the community, so low income, just about managing families, perhaps owner-occupiers, but low income. Social housing, you can see how that can work, but there is going to be a very difficult area, this. My pitch is that the way that government could improve this is by following the Germans. So a green mortgage, where on the sale of your property, that's when people upgrade naturally, that's when they do their decorating. If on the sale of property you have the opportunity of a green mortgage, which doesn't sit with the individual, but sits with the property and is backed by government, so it's very low interest rate. That is a way that you can see how government can facilitate this transfer, and then it works through the housing stock as we develop. So that's insulation. When it comes to what we put into the houses, I am nervous about the government picking winners. I think we should be entirely technology agnostic and heat source agnostic. I'm nervous about a push towards hydrogen. I'm sure we're going to be talking about hydrogen during the course of this conversation. I've got some concerns about it. They're personal concerns, but I'm happy to air them. But we're essentially really here talking about a timing issue, aren't we? You've got an improvement to the quality of your house, the result of that being that your energy costs actually come down, your need for heat comes down, the quality of your environment improves. This is essentially a good news story, but with a timing issue, because whereas currently we have low upfront costs with a relatively cheap gas boiler typically, but high energy costs, what we're going to end up with is high input costs, so an expensive fit to your house, whether it's your boiler or your insulation, but thereafter very significantly reduced running costs. So that's when I say it's a timing issue, you're saving money over in the long run. It's just how do you facilitate people starting that journey? How do you ease the burden on owner-occupiers, well, everyone who's in a house? And there's my suggestions are it's like a carrot cocktail. So lots of carrots, but like any cocktail, you've got a cocktail stick in there as well. So there's a few sticks to prod us, but a lot of incentives as well. So we can talk about installation grants, which has a long and inglorious history, I'm afraid, with the Green Homes Grant being just the latest example where we haven't got it right, but where we can have long-term market signals unleashing the free market to help solve this problem. We've got to train up a workforce that is capable of installing for example, 600,000 heat pumps that we're meant to be installing by 2028 under the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. We've got to hurry up with our building regs so that new builds are properly compliant. At the moment it's 2025. Why? We've got to, the timing is almost uniquely bad for this, but in time, we've got to shift, in my view, the environment levy that we have on electricity, which is increasingly green, should be shifted to fossil fuels, which are increasingly not green. So in shorthand, that's moving from electricity to gas. Well, which politician would want to increase the price of gas further at the moment? Not me. But you can see in the long term, that is something we're going to need to do so that you start giving these market signals that people can respond to. Because as a conservative, I profoundly believe that the market is the best way to solve these, the most efficient way to get the right kind of technology installed and the most efficient use of capital. But the market needs to be given direction by the government. So you need long-term economic signals from the government to allow the market to respond. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure we'll have a good conversation about it.
And just briefly, your personal concerns with hydrogen, what are they?
Didn't take long. Okay, so we've got a big argument going on about what is the future role of hydrogen. And there's a lobby which is suggesting that we should put hydrogen into our domestic gas supply, starting with, I think, up to 15%, but then moving potentially to a transfer from natural gas into hydrogen. My personal view is we will never have sufficient quantities of hydrogen to use it into boiling our kettles. It's always going to be needed for specialist manufacture and heavy goods movement. Because we've got two different types of hydrogen. We've got green hydrogen, which is made from renewables, and we've got blue hydrogen, which is made from natural gas. Green hydrogen is very, very intensive in its use of energy. So you're losing a lot of energy to convert electricity into hydrogen. Why would you do that? What's the rationale for that? When there are specialist manufacturing, like aluminium smelting, for example, very heavily energy intensive, where hydrogen is needed, why would you use huge amounts of electricity, which is going to be used for our expanded transport, for moving on to heat pumps? They all use electricity, where at the moment we're getting it from fossil fuels, hydrocarbons. We're going to need every watt of electricity for the transfer to other areas.
Okay, understood. Thank you. So Bright Blue did a report about a year ago just looking at public attitudes towards decarbonisation and climate change. Lots of, the majority of people across different social groups, political backgrounds, very much in favour of the government going further on that. But when you ask them about, installing renewable energy technologies or installing energy efficient measures, very low awareness of the different methods that could be installed. And an unwillingness, really, to pay much for these measures. So, big challenge for government, and obviously the two big government policies of the last decade, the Green Deal and the Green Homes Grant, have not worked out. Just a quick poll, not particularly scientific, but of the room, who in the current property that they're living in has installed renewable energy technologies or some kind of energy efficiency measure? Insulation or whatever. Okay, great.
This is definitely
brilliant.
Not a representative
Excellent.
Group. This is
a poll to rival Ipsos.
No. Self-selected.
Great. Okay, so I'll now move to Emma to really to discuss the politics of all of this, actually, because obviously the two flagship policies have not worked out. So where next for the government on this whole agenda?
Yes, and I'm not going to, if you can hear me, make any kind of policy suggestions. This is not something I want to get involved in, frankly. But I will say, the public perception, it's very interesting. So when I started this job about 18 months ago, I sort of naively thought that getting people interested in stories about gas boilers was going to be tricky. But it turns out that stories about gas boilers, home installation, energy efficiency are really some of the most kind of best read and things that people are most interested in reading. And generally the response is one of skepticism. People are very keen on the whole to hang on to their gas boilers. But I think that there is a growing realization that gas is not the future, but there is still a huge gap missing about what actually comes next. And I think that, in all the narratives that we've heard about climate change, gas boilers have been lacking. It's always been about your cars, your flying, recycling. So people don't have an understanding of that their gas boiler contributes that 14% to our emissions. And I think one of the reasons for that has been that the alternatives have been, expensive, disruptive, and difficult, and actually not something it's easy to do as a personal choice. So I think the government and industry's challenge in this transition is therefore to make it seem something that is both accessible but also appealing somehow to make this change in your home. So polling suggests that people are happy to make the switch in theory, but they do think that they are going to need some government help to do it. And I think the optimistic view of this transition, which is one that the government has expressed, is that it will be similar to what has happened in the EV market. So that at some point over the next 15 years, when you come to switch your gas boiler, you'll be presented with an alternative option which works in much the same way and has cost parity. And I think that, that there's a chance that could happen, but I think it ignores a few things. One is that this isn't a straightforward swap. When you change from a petrol car to an EV car, it basically gets you from A to B in much the same way. And that isn't the case with changing up your home heating. Getting to low carbon homes is going to require a significant amount of retrofitting for a lot of people. But as Jerome was just saying, this loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, they're just not seen as attractive options for home improvements compared to getting, for instance, a new kitchen. And these changes are big. There's a lot to get your head around. So you're asking people to engage with something that they've really never had to do before. And we're talking about choice in this transition, but really most of us never made a choice about how we heat our homes. The gas was already there, and frankly, most people don't want to have to think about it. So as much about individual choice, it's also about having a range of options for different types of heating, so different types of housing. So whether that's district heating networks, individual heat pumps, or maybe hydrogen, and have the information to understand what might happen in your area. And I think the other issue is time. So we're talking about phasing out petrol and diesel cars from 2030. Gas boilers have maybe an extra 5 years before we have to start that phase out if we are going to meet net zero by 2050. But we are nowhere near where we were 5 years ago on EVs. So the government is targeting 600,000 heat pumps a year from 2028. We currently have 1,200 installers, and last year they put in 36,000 heat pumps. So people are not going to do this if they start hearing horror stories about their friends and their neighbours that have had a botched installation or have ended up with a huge bill. But I think that the more this looms as a big, huge unknown in public consciousness, I think the more that the gap opens up for people to be very resistant to change.
Great, thank you, Emma. So I'm going to go to Kelly now, and really, we've talked about some of the polling that Bright Blue's done, lots of enthusiasm about taking action on climate change. When it comes to the practicalities and the costs around home heating, a bit of scepticism. So where are the public on this, and how can we get public attitudes to change and public behaviour to change?
Sure. So I thought in my 5 minutes I would give you 5 facts on where the public are around this specific issue, but more broadly on climate change, as Ryan's mentioned. So first fact is that the public are very much broadly agreed now that there is a climate crisis. The amount of climate deniers is very, very small. It's like 9 in 10 in the UK who believe we have a crisis. And this is a kind of value now that transcends beyond the UK. There's global recognition across Europe, China even, the US, Canada, etc. And it's not a young person phenomena, it's all age groups who believe this is the case. My second fact is, whilst the attitudes have shifted a lot in the last 10 years, so this has shifted a lot, it used to be just 6 in 10 who thought we had a climate crisis 10 years ago, the actual behaviours that we see have not shifted anywhere near the same amount. Specifically, where we do see behavioural shifts, it is on easy to do things perhaps, like your own personal transport choices, stopping using your car, and also use of flights. Where we see less public behavioural shifts are around how people heat their homes and what they do around energy efficiency in their homes, but also things I thought was shifting faster, like the number of vegans in society. The third key fact is that household heating is actually a climate blind spot. When we ask people what they think they could be doing to help reach net zero and what kind of personal choices they could make, it is recycling, it is personal transport, it is not household heating. And whilst the majority of people, 3 in 5, will say that they do think that they would like to make green improvements to their house, it's just not important as a priority for them. Less than a third would say that they think it's a priority in helping to treat the crisis itself. My fourth key fact is that good energy efficiency is even a lower priority for those who are renting. And there are 4.4 million households which are rented in the UK. And if you ask a renter today what's important for them when they choose their rented accommodation, the cost, the condition, whether they think they could trust their landlord, 1 in 10 would say the energy efficiency ratings on that household. So never mind the owner-occupied households who have perhaps got the ability to make personal changes themselves, those who are renting are not particularly interested. And then my fifth key fact, which is some data that is coming out later today from Ipsos MORI, is around fuel costs, and they are a significant public concern. You'll see this later on. 7 in 10 people say they're so worried about fuel costs rising over this winter, they do not believe they'll be able to cover it. And it's beyond that. 1 in 10 say if fuel costs do rise, they will be going to food banks. 1 in 10 say they will be looking at credit cards to help them fund their personal household expenses. 2 in 5 say that they will not be able to pay other bills. And so there's a significant issue around the financial resilience of certain groups in society in the UK, more women, more children in the household, lower income groups, and those that have got meters installed for their energy. So there are some things to think about there. What does this all mean? Well, whenever the Green Home Grant and also the Green Deal was brought in, they really struggled to get demand from the public for those particular programmes. And that issue is very much still there today. We still don't see public demand for this being particularly high. The second issue is financial resilience. And over this winter, we will see fuel prices rise. And that can go one of two ways. It can either really highlight to people they need to think about things that will help reduce the cost of their energy over time, and it will put them off some of the traditional methods which are higher cost. Or they will really struggle to make the investment and get their head around investment now for gains tomorrow. And I think we will see how that pans out over the winter. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Perfectly on 5 minutes.
Thanks.
A star panellist. Right, we'll move now to Guy. And obviously, Guy, you were in government for a lot of these policy initiatives that have not been successful. We won't blame you. But tell us why they failed.
Well, thanks, Ryan. Not in government for some of them, I would say. So, taking a step back, and we'll come on to the policies at the end. But the starting point that comes out of the logic of what you've heard is we need to make the transition to low carbon heating as easy and attractive for consumers. Now that feels like quite a glib thing to say, but actually we don't spend enough time when we're talking about decarbonisation of various things, thinking about it. Because for electricity, actually, consumers, it doesn't matter that much if your electricity is coming from a coal-fired power station or from an offshore wind turbine. What you really care about is when you come home and you flick the light on, that the light comes on. So you've got to get the system working, you've got all of those issues. But for heating, it's a potentially different experience. So we've got to think a lot more sophisticated way about the consumer. I thought Kelly set the context brilliantly. You know, this kind of strong appetite for environmental action. Everyone's, I'm in favour of net zero and let's go faster, etc., etc. But some of our work will show that 47% of people do not realise that their boiler is contributing to climate change. Their gas boiler is contributing to climate change. So you think about the pace we've got to go at, and you think about some people who want to do the right thing but don't even realise that their boiler is contributing. You've got to take people where they are. And we do have lots of homes that are suited to technologies like heat pumps that are ready to go, and even more with some pretty minor modifications. But there are, as we've discussed, a kind of significant number that are not suited. And absolutely, Emma's absolutely right that a couple of scare stories could really damage this transition. Actually, they're not scare stories because some people have bad heating experiences. So what might be a set of things that you'd need to do when you're thinking about this transition? So first of all, you've got to recognise that different solutions are going to work in different areas. Decarbonising the heating system of Norfolk, for example, is very different from decarbonising the heating system of Manchester. You need to understand the building stock. You need to understand the state of the gas grid. You need to understand the state of the electricity grid. You need to see how these things all fit together as a system. And right now, you've got all these local authorities declaring climate emergencies, but not enough of them have a credible plan to think, right, this is our priority area, this is where we'll put heat networks, etc. It's not about destroying the market, but the truth is with energy, it's a mixture of market forces. As Jerome says, you want to get those market forces working in the right direction. But it's also, in fact, there is some monopoly infrastructure in there. You're going to have to make some choices. And you know, technologies like low carbon bioenergy are going to be part of that, because you know there's a big temptation. A lot of the debate around the green issue is, we'll decarbonise, but I don't want any of this technology. I don't want any nuclear, and can we not have any CCUS, etc. That totally underestimates the scale and the challenge of this problem. We are going to need all of the above low carbon technologies. So ruling out technologies in a particular area is really risky. So what might consumer offering look like? So we do a lot of work at the Catapult, actually, with companies working and installing low carbon heating technologies at people's homes. What puts people off? Disruption. And by the way, that can be some pretty minor disruption as well. This is, you don't have, people are like, oh no, I just can't be bothered. Cost is a factor, and obviously for a particular segment, it's a much bigger factor. But actually, the thing at the moment, and this reflects the kind of nascent industry, the thing that puts people off the moment is my home going to get warm enough, particularly when you're talking about heat pumps. Now, it's kind of madness, really. You go over to Europe, heat pumps are everywhere, including in temperatures even colder than Manchester in October. And heat pumps work absolutely fine, but you've got to get the system right. And it's worth saying as well, Andy might tell me off for this, but the heating experience in the UK at the moment is not always brilliant. We've all got drafts, or damp, or mould, or overheating, or we fight with have thermostat wars with our wives. That might just be me. Although we've got data to say it's not just me. So it's not a brilliant experience. Can you come up with something better, which just happens to be low carbon? We need the independent advisors. I can't remember who used the numbers of the number of people who are skilled in this area to deliver. We need that transformed workforce, not least because the average age of heating engineers in the UK is over 50. At the moment, so this generational challenge is absolutely huge. But we've also got to get the pace right. You think about electric vehicles and that transition; it's quite powerful. The government was brave enough, and it was really brave a year ago to say, okay, 2030, you can't buy an internal combustion engine. But they couldn't have done that 5 years ago, or definitely not 10 years ago. When you thought about electric vehicles, you thought about milk floats and G-Whizzes, those cars that looked like they were going to fall over when they went around a corner. You couldn't have done it there. But when there are Teslas and everyone else is in there, auto manufacturers are transforming the sector. You can get ahead of that. And we're not there with low carbon heating, so the pace of stuff is really important. Grants are going to play a big role in this. I'll tell you why the Green Home Grant didn't work. I'm a plumber. I'm really busy. This big demand comes in from the government, but it's only for 6 months. Or maybe 12 months. Why would I retrain? I don't know what's going to come in 6 months. You need to look at 5 years, 10 years forward and think that's really going to be a market. And the final thing I'll finish on is just to say, and it's been mentioned a few times, that you're going to have to, in this transition, you're going to have to think in a particular way about vulnerability, because you're going to have new types of vulnerability created, not just from the heating system, but when we've got smart homes and our EV is talking to our fridge and charging at different times. You've got to make sure that you're not creating new types of vulnerability, where you don't have digital literacy, where people are unfamiliar with technology and they can't afford to do it. So it's absolutely essential, and this is back to the wider point I'm making, that you're making it easy and attractive for everyone, not just the able-to-pay market, but everyone, because this is a transition that will affect all of us.
Thank you, Guy. Very, very thoughtful stuff. So just thinking about take-up amongst consumers, obviously, in terms of government policy, we've had carrots. You've had a loan, now you've had a grant, seemingly they've not worked. So do we need to be thinking about sticks more, i.e. taxes or even regulation? With landlords, we say, you can't rent out a property unless it has a minimum EPC rating. Do we need to be doing that for people who are selling their homes, or is that a step too far?
So the energy wonk of me and say, right, well, if you've just got this challenge of decarbonising homes on this pace, you'll either just regulate or you'll tax the carbon and pull the lever and the market will solve the problem. But the old political advisor in me would go, what the hell are you talking about? We've got to get to a stage where, we're installing, heat pumps wise about 35,000 low carbon heating systems in the UK. That's a pretty small industry. I'm not quite sure what it is for on the renewable side. I'm sure Andy's going to say. You've got to get to the stage where it's really desirable. And we work with companies who are looking at options like serviced options. So instead of buying your kind of heating by the unit of gas that you buy a temperature. You say, right, I'm going to have my living room at 21 degrees at this time, and I'm going to do that, and the company will work out with all that complicated stuff at the back end to work out how it all fits together, etc. But you buy the outcome. You think about how much we buy through serviced offerings in other parts of the, whether it's mobile phone contracts or how we buy TV now. Heating is really kind of, is not taking advantage of what digital technology in terms of understanding what people actually want in their homes. Still got a long way to go, but it's a really exciting area to get there. And that, once you've got those offerings in the market, then politicians will have the confidence to say, actually we're going to get to a regulatory space. But we're not there yet. That's the point about pace. You've got to get that balance right. Otherwise, you'll have Emma will be writing every week disaster stories, and then people will just go, no thanks.
Okay, understood. Right, so Andy talked about how different parts of the country need different solutions, and we have to be technologically agnostic. So interested in the kind of different products, services that we need to be offering to create that choice in the consumer market.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much.
Use the microphone.
Yeah, just me. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Hopefully that's better. I want to start with we've been talking about big numbers. I want to bring a small number into play, the number 8, and I'll come on to explain what that number 8 is in a second. But in the UK, there's about 27 million homes, and about 2 million of those are rurally off the gas grid, and that's where we serve our market. But if we think about that number of homes, 27 million, between now and the end of 2050, the net zero target, there are less minutes than there are homes. And we have to do something to nearly every single one of those homes, because there are very few that are net zero compliant. And if we think that somebody has to do that, then that's, you have a working week to consider. So an average, say, 40-hour working week, that's one home every 8 seconds between now and the end of 2050 that has to have something done to it. The scale is breathtaking, really, to get into that. We have to embrace everything. Everything is there, and we have to embrace everything. All the technologies that have been mentioned, whether it be heat pumps, district heating, a limited amount of bioresources, delivering biofuels into certain markets as well, are all important. They're all contributory. And that's what we're looking at. It's not about either or, it's about and also. It's about looking at the combinations of heatings that are right for the housing stock. And it was said earlier on, we've got a housing stock that needs improving. We've actually got the worst energy efficiency housing stock in Europe, in the UK, and that's even worse in rural. It's estimated to be about 5 years behind its on-grid counterparts. So we have to think of the solutions that are right for the homes, no matter where they are and the incumbent people that are in there and having to deal with the heating system that's coming their way. Guy mentioned that the heating experience might not be great all the time, and that's true. We have to change that. And we're certainly changing what we do. We've actually been delivering renewable energy, renewable replacement for our fuel, since before net zero was introduced. So back in 2018, before net zero was legally binding and introduced, we started our journey, and we're aiming to finish by 2040, so before the 2050 deadline. But this is going to be a solution for a few. It's a relatively niche product, but it is, if it's applied in the right areas, it encourages and gives that appetite for moving, because if you can see that there is a positive reward coming at the end of it, then the rest of the people who are watching that transition will be willing to go on their journey. That might not incorporate renewable LPG, it might be their own journey, whether it be a heat pump, district heating, a hybrid, or whatever it may be. And other people are modelling for this as well. The National Grid did their future energy scenarios recently, and they modelled 3 scenarios that met net zero, 1 that didn't, but the 3 that did, all measured, all modelled for biofuels. Bio-LPG was in there. The Committee on Climate Change have also done the same. They estimated about 500,000 rural properties on a hybrid with bio-LPG. And they're not actually just talking about it, their chairman has actually done it. So he's moved from oil to a renewable heating system in a hybrid with bio-LPG. But it's not right for everyone. And I keep on saying this, it's about choice and fairness and looking at the options that are there. And it's about taking care of what statements we put out as well, because the estimations at the minute when we ask are that 80 to 90% of off-grid properties are suitable for a heat pump when we ask the government. And that comes from a study back in 2017 that looked at the technical feasibility of is that possible. It didn't take into account cost nor disturbance, and I think we've heard that several times throughout the panel, that those are the 2 major barriers. And actually in the Citizens' Assembly, they were cited as the two major barriers from general public to the approach to taking steps in their property. The disturbance, having to move out, or the upfront cost in particular, about how to do that. So we ran a cost modelling to see what the impact would be through a third party, and heat pumps still come out the majority. They still come out the majority for off-grid. I'm not saying that heat pumps are not important. I think you need to be careful with an 80 to 90% ambition. When cost is included, it's more around 55 to 60% would be heat pumps, but there are better cost options beyond that for certain houses that might be hard to treat. That includes some bioenergy, includes biomass, it includes, if the environment is right and there are enough houses together, some district heating. But the choice needs to be there. It's not about picking winners. I think I've heard that a few times. My last point is about who goes first. I think I heard someone say earlier on that gas boilers would be 2035. That's on-grid. Off-grid, they're looking at doing it from 2026 potentially. So 2026 in 4 years is potentially 10 years ahead of where the on-grid experience would be. And again, with most things, if you're looking to do something different and show a change, you'd look at the early adopters who would give the best experience to those that are watching, because everybody will be watching, because it is a significant undertaking. And I'd say that potentially off-grid is not the readily available set of housing stock to move for heat pumps, for lower temperature heating systems, because they are, in the main, less well insulated, they are older, they're more detached, you have leakier, to use a phrase, properties. That all needs sorting, but sorting in 4 years' time before it starts is quite a difficult undertaking. So I'd be advocating there for a heat pump ready approach. Look for the properties that are heat pump ready to get the scale, to get the centre of gravity, the mass that we can move forward with, so that we can give a good experience for everybody watching and allow that to be quicker and more focused. So my final point, just to reiterate, 8 seconds. Let's not let that slip backwards. That's hard enough already. So we need to get going and we need to embrace everything. And that requires a choice. And heat pumps are so important for what we're going to move forward with, but let's target them quickly at the properties that are ready to take them, to get scale and to get energy into the market to use upon.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor, but also from the live stream. And if you're asking questions through the live stream, please use the Slido link, which is available to you, and then we'll ask the question through me directly. Hopefully there's people there watching in the distance somewhere. So let's open it up. If you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be great. So we'll start with this chap here. And just wait for the microphone, please.
Good morning, I'm Rory Payne. I'm from Arundel and South Downs in Sussex.
Thank you.
We have a rural off-grid property. The quirk of the property is it has 2 electricity meters. One is a smart meter that no longer works because we switched supplier, and one hasn't gone smart yet. The combination of government, regulator, market has not worked for smart meters. How does the panel think we're going to achieve the massive change that we need in the heating sector?
Great, thank you. And I'm going to take another question before we come. Sorry, it was Rory, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's have the gentleman right at the back. I think it's a gentleman. Sorry, not. Yeah, just because I couldn't see you, not anything. How you look. Sorry.
Adam from National Trust. One of the things we haven't really mentioned so far is the fact that 1/5 of our housing is pre-1919, so traditional in the technical term, which means it's really hard and needs really specific sort of approaches. One of the things that's often a barrier that the NTO found, we're a big rental landlord, is the EPCs that often incentivise the wrong actions for those traditional houses. How do we approach that? Do we need to reform it, or are there other solutions we can find?
Okay, so Jerome, maybe you want to come in on Rory or Adam's question.
Can I choose Adam's, because Rory's is really hard. So I'm going to leave it to the pros.
We'll leave that to Guy.
Yeah, exactly. So you're absolutely right. Pre-1919 houses are the hardest to treat. I live in one. It's really cold, by the way. And what the Committee on Climate Change suggests is we leave them until last. So we develop the technology. You start with the easy wins. And that, surprising, is housing between about 1970 and about 1990, where we had reasonably good insulation in the building regulations. You had cavity walls. What went wrong after 1990 is someone came up with a really bad idea, which is to save money on your heating systems, you move to micro-bore pipes. So instead of being about 13 mil in diameter, they went to 5 mil, I think, which is unsuitable for heat pumps. So post-1990, the level of disruption to convert to heat pumps, if that's where the direction you're going, you have to rip out, you have to replumb. So it's much more expensive, much more disruptive. So start with easy wins, 1970s to about 1990, and then you work on from there as the tech develops, as the workforce develops, which is a really important point. You know, where are these people coming from and how are they being trained? Because they're not being trained at the moment. Just a very local point, City College in Norwich, I represent a Norfolk constituency. They have a training suite for heating and plumbing engineers. There is no heat pump module there currently. Bonkers. But that's what you do. You start with easy ones and you work out.
Guy.
Thanks again. Right. So I'm going to answer Adam's question as well, but I'll come to Rory's first, don't worry. Smart meters, another policy that I inherited when I was in government. I feel I'm taking the blame for a lot of energy policy over the last 10 years, probably unfairly. I think one of the fundamental problems with smart meters is we introduced smart meters without actually thinking, well, what's the consumer benefit from this? And there was talk of, if you keep monitoring, you can get £6 off your annual energy bill, which for most people is pretty insignificant. Or I think the numbers were slightly higher, but it wasn't thought of, right, how are we going to build the kind of flexibility sensors? And only now you're starting to see actually the value of smart meters. So if you've got an electric vehicle, you can start getting cheap ability to charge it up at night, etc. You need a smart meter infrastructure to be able to do that. But we did the infrastructure without thinking about what the consumer proposition might be. So it's back to my point about this is not going to become, the government are not going to become the desirable consumer offerings that you're going to need to do your house. You're going to need people in the market working out what works, what doesn't work, etc., and coming to you with something that is desirable. But they're only going to invest in the innovation they need in order to deliver that if they think there's a big enough market in place. So you're going to have this dance between policy and regulation and the marketplace. Because right now, it's for heat pumps, it's a marketplace of 30,000, 40,000 a year. It's pretty small versus a gas boiler installation market of million one a year. So it is going to be a bit of a dance between policy and other things, and actually having companies that are going to offer it. To Adam's question about EPCs, so EPCs are, I'm not quite sure what the technical term is, but they are crap. Right? They are. We all know it. We all pay our £30, or they get folded into when we're selling our house or whatever. They are appalling, and it's a disgrace that they're appalling because you think about the data that we have about how we use so many elements of our lives. There's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't have much better understanding. And by the way, this might be one area where smart meters could be really helpful. You can use smart meter data to actually understand the thermal efficiency of your house. Just to give you an example, I'm converting my house to heat pump at the moment. Did the EPC right thing. It told me one cost, and then I did some actual proper heat thermal calculations with a professional. Like, the difference in cost between the two was about £2,000 in terms of the equipment I was going to need based on the advice. You think about the effect of that across the country, it's huge. So I think that system needs to be fixed because it will allow you to solve your old houses problem, actually understanding, because some old houses are actually pretty thermally efficient. You've got big stone walls, things like that. They're perfect for holding heat, but not always the case. But until you actually understand what the proper thermal efficiency is, you can't get anywhere.
Andy?
I was just going to comment on the EPC question in rural as well. Completely agree about the age of the properties. Certainly National Trust have, and as I alluded to earlier on, particularly in off-grid, a lot of them are older. EPC is perverse in the way that it works. I like the way you've described it, and in the fact that you're right, it drives the wrong behaviour. It will choose the lowest cost fuel sometimes to deliver a better EPC. So if you're on a fuel type and oil is cheaper, you move to oil to get a better EPC, but your carbon emissions go up. Perverse. because we're just increasing the level of carbon emissions by cost. So we've been advocating to remove that cost element and just look at the thermal efficiency of the property and not bring cost into it, because from our point of view, for example, bio-LPG, which is more expensive per kilowatt hour than oil, you'd be driving people away from a renewable decarbonised fuel onto a highly carbonised fuel instead. So that's a significant change that needs to be undertaken.
Great, let's have more questions. So we'll start with this lady here, and if you could wait for the microphone.
Thank you. My question is this. You're all, except I must say, the Daily Telegraph, Sunday Telegraph, have some brilliant articles about the cost of net zero from the viewpoint of ordinary people out there who cannot afford to change over and are frightened of the costs, and they won't do it. And it's all very well saying grants for this, grants for that, grants for the other. That's fine, I suppose, if you're on benefits or very poor, but there'll be people caught in the middle, and they won't be able to afford this. And I can tell you this much, the Conservative majority will be finished by the next election if you pursue these without thought that a lot of people are not going to have the finances or the resources to change over by your deadline.
Great, and can I just ask your name, sorry?
Victoria.
Victoria.
Victoria Brooks, and I'm from Lincoln. And in Lincolnshire, I may also add, there's a lot of people that still have wood or coal to heat their hot water in their open fires.
Yep.
So go with that.
Okay.
Same in Norfolk.
Great. Let's have some more questions. So this lady here, the face mask on.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Kate from the Aldersgate Group. I'm just wondering what the panel is expecting or hoping for from the upcoming heat and building strategy from government.
Okay, so Kate on the heat and building strategy, and then this gentleman right at the back with the glasses.
Randall from Policy Connection. I'm just wondering, what's your views on real consumer choice versus some more centralised or localised government approaches to decarbonising heat? To what extent can people really have a choice in choosing technology versus, say, a street-by-street approach in more populated areas?
Okay, so Kelly, perhaps I can come to you first on Victoria's question.
Yeah, I think, Victoria, your question is very much in the policymaker psyche at the minute. We do a lot of work at Ipsos MORI looking at energy efficiency policies, heating systems, etc., and public perceptions of them. And the distributional effects of some of these policies are going to be significant. And what government are working on at the minute, and what we would be advising on, is how they can counteract some of those distributional effects, but first they're trying to categorise them. Who's going to be affected negatively? To what extent can they actually mitigate some of those issues? And so it is very much, it doesn't appear to me from advising government on particular issues that they are doing this in a vacuum with not understanding that there will be effects on particular groups in society. So I think we will see a strategy which is less blanket and much more niche when it does come out, with a lot of mitigating actions in place. But I'm sure some of those in government will be able to say more about that. The other piece just to comment on was around real consumer choice. And I think in just looking at what is inhibiting people shifting to some of the different types of heating system, people have already said cost is an issue, information is an issue too, as well as some of the issues around the sort of disruption in people's houses. But one of the other things is actually it's not really a social norm for different parts of society at the minute. You don't see your neighbours doing it, you don't see your friends doing it. And actually, to what degree will choice be available for all different parts of society? I think if you look at things like social housing, there will not be huge amounts of choice. People who are accessing social housing will not have a choice in what energy efficient systems are put in place on their behalf. And so I think fairness for all will be a really difficult thing to deliver.
And Emma, will this issue cause the Telegraph to turn against their former star columnist?
Maybe. I think it's a huge issue, and I think it's quite clearly a lively debate within the party itself, and that is what we're seeing. I mean, you're talking about what we're expecting from the heat and building strategy. At this point, I just want it to come out, because it's been delayed for so long, and it's clearly been delayed for so long because there is so much concern over what the impact is going to be on the politics of this when it does come out, and it's going to come out alongside, the Treasury review of net zero and this net zero strategy. And it seems like there is so much concern at this point of what the politics are, that it's delaying actually coming up with the policies or putting the policies out there. And that in itself is leading to some of these concerns about what it's actually going to look like and how it's going to impact people. So if people know that they're going to have to make changes because we're talking about it, but they don't know how they're supposed to be helped to make those changes, or they don't have the information about even what those changes are going to be, all you're left with is this huge hole where you're just concerned about what that's going to mean for you. So I think that to some extent there are difficult decisions that are going to have to be made, and you might say, when you've got a very strong majority, good time to make them. But yes, unless they start to actually move, I think the politics of this is going to get more difficult, not easier.
So Jerome, what are your wishes for the heat and building strategy, other than it being published?
I think being published is a great idea, and I'm looking for the answers. So I'm not going to prejudge what's in it because I don't know. So I'm just guessing. I think your question is the best one we've heard today, because it's the most relevant for the vast majority of our voters. That's the residents of this country. Because with government we can see the problem, which is the 14% of emissions which come from our heating. We know as government that we've got to address that, but we can't go. We can show leadership, but we can't get out of kilter with the general public, because if we do, we'll get that kind of pushback, and then what's the point? We won't actually be successful in the objective. So yeah, the government's got to show leadership. Yes, they've got to educate. It's that awful phrase, pitch rolling. It's talking to people about the problem that needs to be solved and the support that will be available. So that, for example, on grants, the implication of your question was that they're only going to be available for low-income groups. I haven't seen the heat and the strategy, but I would be very surprised if they weren't available to everyone, because as has been pointed out, we need this to be as pain-free as possible for the general public to get acceptance, to get the movement that we recognise we need.
Okay, I'm going to ask for some more questions. So let's start with this gentleman here.
Thank you. Good morning. Jonathan Purdy. That microphone isn't working. Jonathan Purdy, Crawley. There's been lots of talk about particularly off-grid, where of course you mean off of the gas grid, but that area of homes is also the ones that are most weakly served by the electricity grid. What thinking and planning is going on to the reinforcement of the electricity grid, particularly where you're looking at rural heat pumps? And I take that view, we currently have a price control going on being led by Ofgem for the electricity distributors, which is still very much focused on don't spend any money. Thank you.
Okay, and then I'm going to take some more questions. So this gentleman at the back, yeah.
Good morning. Andrew Whale, Altrincham and Sale West. One statement, one comment. I disagree strongly with one of Kelly's points. Science and engineering, or the correctness of science and engineering, has nothing whatsoever to do with democracy or loudness of voice. Flat Earth, the majority believed in flat Earth. They weren't correct. So just because the majority believes something, I don't believe it's necessarily correct. And secondly, how are you going to convince the majority of people to spend 25, 30, 40 grand on a house with subsequent costs when China is doing absolutely nothing and has done nothing for the last 30 years? At the moment, China has got a power cut because it's running out of Australian coal. Until the policy is to government policy is to tax imports and Chinese manufactured goods or manufactured goods anywhere based on its energy cost, then I think we're flying in the wind, personally.
Okay, good point.
Great. Jerome, maybe you want to come in.
Yes, so we don't rule the world, we just rule this one bit, a little bit of it. We're responsible for about 1% of global emissions, which is the key point you're making there. I don't see, okay, this is my personal pitch, is I don't see how we can fundamentally address this without some form of carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is a treatment of imports that assess the carbon content of that import and apply a fair tariff to it, which is similar to the price that you're applying to your domestic economy. And until we do that, we cannot unleash the power of the free market to help to solve the problems which it has created. Why has the free market created the carbon problems that we've got? It's because when you produce a glass like this, I pay for the silicon, I pay for the heat, I pay for the the marketing costs. But the cost of the carbon, that's an externality, that just goes into the atmosphere. I don't pay for it. So I'm not getting free exchange. So when somebody comes up with another glass that is low carbon but costs a bit more, I, as a consumer, cannot tell the difference. If you start adding in the price of carbon, then the consumer can change. But we need to stop our domestic economy being undercut by imports. You have to apply that same principle to imports as well. And I personally cannot see any way that you can do that without a carbon border adjustment mechanism. I've raised it with the Chancellor, I've raised it with Alok Sharma, I've raised it with Kwasi Kwarteng, and they're sick and tired of me. I've had an adjournment debate in the House of Commons on carbon border adjustment mechanisms because I entirely agree with you.
Great. Andy, and if you could bring the mic towards you.
Thank you for the reminder. I'd just like to pick up on the rural electricity piece. You're right, the electricity network in many parts of the UK, rural UK, is not what it needs to be, and the investment there would be significant. Now, there's, again, some work done to look at what we could mitigate by deploying a mixed technology approach, so therefore not everything being electrified. And the study that has been done by an industry representing biofuels, it's £7 billion saving if you don't have to invest in effectively rewiring the countryside to allow it to take this level of electrification that's required for the home. So there's an enormous saving, and across the homes that's a potential cost per household. But I think the key thing that we keep on coming back to is it actually right to approach these properties that are not ready, either from a fabric point of view, the electricity network point of view, or potentially the age and various different other things of the property to go first if we're looking to move forward with providing encouragement for people to move along the journey. It feels as if we're approaching the wrong cohort of properties and people to go first on the journey.
Guy?
Just to comment on Jonathan's point, that was the point I was trying to make about you need to think about just to comment on Jonathan's point, you need to think about the local conditions of the energy system in that area, because it's all very well saying, yeah, we're all going to switch to heat pumps in a particular area if the electricity grid can't cope with that. I would say, just as an aside, we don't stop people installing 10 kilowatt electric power showers, which are probably more draw on the grid than heat pumps. But the whole point is you've got to get the system working together and think about the choices. And right now, in different local areas, that's very hard to do. You've got all the local authorities declaring climate emergencies, but no robust engineering plan to actually how you're going to get there in lots of examples. So I think that's a missing piece of the policy, because it's got to work, right? It can't be people going, oh, well, I'll just, the grid's a bit short, so I'll turn off my heating. It's just, it's absolutely insane to think like that.
Great. Kelly, did you want to come back on the tyranny of the majority point?
No, not really. I think obviously public opinion matters to me, and therefore your opinion matters to me as well. But public opinion in this debate matters a huge amount. We have seen public opinion shift dramatically on how concerned people are about climate change, but we haven't seen the actions move alongside it. So I think your opinion matters, and it's valid.
Great, more questions. So let's have this gentleman here. And the mic is now working. So this gentleman just there. Yeah.
Thanks. Richard Cleur, Leader, Wiltshire Council. You've explained very clearly where we need to be. You've explained where we are now. What we haven't got is an understanding of how we get there. You talk about apprenticeships. Yeah, we need apprenticeships, but no college is going to fund apprenticeships without a clear pipeline of work. You talk about what local councils can do. I'm retrofitting all the council housing in Wiltshire to EPCB, but that's 2.5% of my housing stock. What I don't have, I'd like to understand from you is how we go from where we are now to actually delivering at scale in ways that aren't going to scare off the consumers. And yet at the same time, we're encouraging housing associations to only upgrade to an EPCC by maybe 2035, depending on what actually goes through. And the institutional insanity of new builds, which are the easiest to upgrade, being built right now that will all need retrofitting in 15 years. So how do we get beyond that? How do we go from talking about this to delivering? Because those levers of powers don't just lie with us as councils, they lie centrally, I think, as well.
Great, and I'm just going to add a question that's come through from the live stream. So someone out there is watching. A guy called Thomas who says, does the government need to do much more to decarbonise social housing? The current social housing decarbonisation funding is only a fraction of what is needed for the sector. So thank you for that question, Thomas. And we'll take another question from the floor. This gentleman here right at the front.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Richard Hosking from Devon, southwest Devon. My question is, there's been some press talk about the replacement of natural gas by hydrogen in the national grid, yet no one seems absolutely convinced at this moment in time that that is possible. Do we have any insights on that on the panel, please? And secondly, if that is to actually occur, Jerome has mentioned the supply issues. Are we actually going to be able to achieve that? Are we going to be able to do conversions to existing gas boilers? Thank you.
Great. Okay, so Jerome, maybe you want to answer Richard the first or Richard the second?
I'm going to go for Richard the first because you know more about decarbonising houses than almost anyone in the country, because what you've done in Wiltshire has been truly groundbreaking. But you gave evidence to the Environmental Audit Committee a few weeks ago, and from memory, you said that the increased cost in fitting to net zero now was only 4 or 5% above your normal.
So to build, sorry.
Yeah.
To build new council housing is 4% above at the moment.
That's right.
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm really pleased I remember that. So which begs the question: why on earth? I'm going to bring that around. Why on earth are house builders not building zero carbon housing now? And we're waiting until the new building regulations come in 2025. I think they were first meant to come in 2016, and they've been delayed and delayed and delayed. And I do not understand it, particularly with the evidence that you gave, which is the delta between the costs is only 4%. So it's an obvious first step. As to how, we're learning from your experience, I think, rather than you coming to me saying, how do we do it? You're on the ground. You've got first-hand experience of how we start changing these things. I'm a politician. We talk about terms of policy, and we've got to work out and learn from people who are actually on the ground on the best way to achieve it.
So Guy, maybe this point that Thomas was raising about social housing.
Yes, social housing is definitely one area that you would start on, not least because you've got a reduced number of kind of clients, as it were, that you could work through. But you've got to be careful. I mean, you've obviously got to be careful about how you can do it. But the opportunities are replicable, and you can build up a supply chain, and there's a significant market size, and you can make much of the progress that you want there. The government certainly put a lot of money in the manifesto. I don't think that's necessarily turned into money announced yet, but we've got spending review in 4 weeks' time, and I would expect that to be one of the key asks from the department. I mean, just on the new build point that Richard raised, I mean, it's a horrendous decision to not make all new buildings, and we've built 1 million buildings since million new homes since 2015. Which, as you say, will all require retrofit. It's difficult enough anyway. The extra cost, and actually for the consumer, it would have been a much better experience than you've got. So, and just the second point on hydrogen, if I can. Yeah. I mean, the gentleman earlier raised the point about basic physics of how you're going to get this. In order to create the amount of hydrogen you're going to need to already for the economy, for all the hard bits to treat the economy, you're going to have a low carbon hydrogen sector of about 300 terawatt hours. Just to give you scale, that's about the size of the current electricity system, and that's before you get to heating largely. And you've got to create all that hydrogen, which is not straightforward, etc. So hydrogen is going to have a huge role, but it should be going into the bits of the economy that are harder to decarbonise than anywhere else. That might be in some heating examples, but it will depend. Again, it depends on local areas. Depends what other things going on in that state. But it's not a silver bullet, and it's often being presented like that.
Andy?
just comment on the hydrogen one really, and just from again, I approach things from as you can tell, from a rural off-grid perspective. Please don't consider hydrogen for that area, because that requires transportation and storage, and that's not something you want to do, particularly with hydrogen moving forward. It's a product that, so if that's talked about, please do disregard that, because it isn't something that is viable for an off-grid, decentralized energy perspective. There are hydrogen-ready boilers that are available and are becoming more at scale. There's a hydrogen strategy that's due to be developed as well. I'm not here to talk particularly about the hydrogen economy that might or might not be. I just think we need to be cognizant of the fact that off-grid is not one of those sectors.
I mean, Emma, the government really pushing hydrogen, sort of the hydrogen economy. Is there too much hype around hydrogen?
I think that, we talk about being sort of technology agnostic, and I think that's where the government has been on this. I get the sense that there is some kind of growing realization of the difficulties of using hydrogen specifically in home heating. I do think there's a danger while we are agnostic on this, though, that you embed some of this narrative around hydrogen as a potential kind of drop-in alternative to gas. And that ends up with people, you advise people to buy a hydrogen-ready boiler, so they'll do it thinking that they're doing the right thing and that they will be able at some point to switch over their hydrogen-ready boiler to hydrogen, and it will come to it and they won't be able to. And they'll feel like, as with so many things, diesel, etc., they've tried to do the right thing, been given the bad advice, and are left with something that doesn't work.
Kelly?
So not on the point on hydrogen, but on the question of how do we get there, I think we need to be realistic on the demand side issues as well as the supply side issues. Supply side around number of people who can fit it, where the materials are coming from, etc., really substantive. But on the demand side, we would be very amiss if we think for 1 second that the general public is going to move as fast mentally as they would need to in order to meet some of these targets. For example, the key reason why the public think about changing their heating system is because their old heating system isn't functioning well. It's not because of, I want a better energy efficient system in place. And where do they go to find out what they need to do about their heating system? They go to their boiler repairment people. They don't go to find out about lots of different energy efficient options that could be available. Majority still go to the current heating provider, who may or may not be attuned to all of the other options on the table. And so if public demand is not going to shift and attitudes are not going to move as fast as needed, then you can't just use carrot. You do have to use stick, and that, as Victoria mentioned, is incredibly unpopular and going to be very unfair if the government do not mitigate against some of the challenges. Things like the phasing out of options that people might have now, totally phasing those out, levies, all of that becomes incredibly unpopular. And so, like the congestion charges in London, very unpopular, really caused problems for the mayor. Then they brought them in and suddenly everything was fine. I don't think it's going to be the same with this kind of heating system and the amount of money required. So I think considerable effort will need to go into mitigating some of the issues when you have to use the stick to move the public along a little bit.
Jerome?
Yeah, just on going back to Richard's point on hydrogen, I cannot see how you can have hydrogen in the domestic heating system unless it's blue hydrogen, because we just won't have the volumes of it. Green hydrogen is made from renewable electricity. Blue hydrogen is taking natural gas, and I think it's called reform methane is the process, which is very energy intensive in itself to do that, and it can only work if we can develop at massive scale carbon capture and storage, which has its own issues. It's not a technology which is readily available right now, and it's currently expensive. So figures of around costing about £100 a tonne to extract carbon, that's a lot. So unless we can fix quite a number of really difficult technical solutions and bring the price right down, I can't see blue hydrogen taking off.
Okay, let's have some more questions. So this gentleman here, and then we'll come to this gentleman here.
Morning, Richard Bullock here from Connect Energy. I'll start with my question and then a statement. Do the panel think that there's a legacy perception issue with solar technology? And I suppose a statement, we've talked a lot about heat pumps. The problem is you need to power those electrically, especially in the winter, and it can be very energy intensive to do that, and the grid in a lot of places isn't necessarily up to that. My own opinion is that whenever you combine it with smart batteries, it can be very, very efficient. Like you've got Octopus pay you to charge your battery now, and you can have paybacks in less than 5 years if you combine battery and solar. I suppose I just find it a bit strange that nobody's talked about that here.
Great, thank you, Richard. Richard the Third there. Not sure that's a compliment, knowing Richard III. Right, this gentleman here. Sorry, can you just wait for the microphone?
Leon Cook, Atticus Communications. Like all good policy problems, it comes down to a question of money. So one is the prohibitive costs of heat pumps, for example. I haven't read the heat and building strategy, but I can tell you what's in it, having spoken to the Bay's Clean Heat team. It is heat pumps first, and that is it. And going back to Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, it's currently 3.8 billion. If you speak to the national contractors, it needs to be 100 billion, 25 times that amount of money. There are many technologies like infrared which are completely taken out of the mix because RHI, for example, has got 6 months to run, and yet it won't adopt any new technologies, and that runs out in 2025. Therefore, Jerome, I've read what you've said in Hansard, so I know what you think on this, but to what extent you are impressing upon your colleagues ahead of a spending review that they need to put more cash into this and open up the possibility for more alternative technologies to play a part.
Okay, thank you, Liam. And then I've got a question from the live stream. So Duncan has asked, what policies have our European neighbours used to ensure better insulated homes heated by low carbon heating technologies? Can we replicate these? So we could have, one of the panel could do a bit of policy tourism. Guy.
Just on the last one first. So the country that's made the most progress European-wise, somebody will check me if I got this wrong, on heating is Sweden. But it didn't do it in 5 years or 10 years. It's a 30-year project. And to go back to Victoria's point earlier, it takes a long time. And that was a mixture of, guess what? Price signals, regulation, support for consumers, support for district heating, etc. But it was done over a period of time, and it built up the skills, supply chain, all the kind of issues we talked about. It is a multi-decadal challenge, just so you don't scare consumers off in the way that have been talked about here. Just to Leon's point, if I may as well. So there's loads of one of the great things about working at the Catapult is we work with loads of organisations who are trying brilliant new technologies and different approaches to decarbonising this challenge. And there's so much exciting stuff happening in heat and people trying new things. But you're absolutely right. Until there is a real market there, they'll all be kind of, just testing and doing it in a few friends' houses. This is a massive market. It's 26 million homes that are going to need to change over the next decades, etc. But that's only going to happen with policy. But you can't go too fast on the policy because then you get the bad consumer experience. That's why I describe it as a dance. It's got to be so. To Kelly's point about you've got to take the public where they are. You can't just drop this on them and expect people to change quickly. But new technology is going to be a really exciting part of that, which is extremely exciting.
Emma, I don't know, through sort of your work, you've looked at different countries and whether they're sort of shining examples that we could follow.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about some countries in Europe is that how they responded to the oil crisis in the 1970s, which was to embark on major energy efficiency measures so that they could be more energy independent. So it will be interesting to see how we respond to what's going on with gas prices at the moment, because we are currently now at a place where our gas prices are massively dependent on what's going on in the rest of the world, and the only one of the ways we can move away from that is to be less dependent on gas. But I guess it's about whether we're sort of wanting to have that conversation. I mean, we did see we have seen like searches for alternatives to gas boilers spiked massively recently. So people are obviously interested in knowing how they can do it. So it will be interesting to see how that goes, I think.
Jerome?
Okay, Duncan, dealing with policy tourism, I've mentioned earlier on what's happened and been successful in Germany, and that is a government-backed green mortgage. So which when people buy a house, they get a mortgage just like you or I would. and then they can get an additional mortgage, which is the green mortgage, that is very, very low interest rates because it's backed by the government, and you use that to do the energy upgrades to your house. And it's not a personal debt. It's very oddly, it sits with the property and not with the individual. So that has been effective in Germany. I think I'm very interested in that. The other thing is France. So France doesn't install 30 to 40,000 heat pumps every year. They're putting in about 400,000 heat pumps a year now, and they've done that via grants. So that's ramped up very quickly. But there is a problem with that as well, which is the government talks about the cost of heat pumps coming down as we ramp up the installation. Well, this is a global market. We're not designing and building them in the UK. And if we're already installing 400,000 a year in France, what is the potential for a further decline in prices? I worry about that.
But just on that, I mean, my understanding is that the bulk of the cost in the UK, Guy would know better, is because we have a cottage industry basically of installation. So it's not so much about the manufacture of the heat pump itself. It's about having someone who can come in and do it in a day rather than 3-5 days and having to get a different part from there and a different part from there.
EDF is doing some interesting work on that, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Andy?
Yeah, there's a couple of points, potentially more from a supply side. We work and are part of a larger organisation that has a European footprint, so we see some of the policies in play there that actually encourage investment at a company level for renewable energies. So there's a platform there of not picking winners, and I think that was said earlier on, and also you said the heat and building strategy as a heat pump first approach. There's a picking winners option that's happening here that perhaps doesn't encourage the level of investment in other technologies that we need here to give the variety and to give the choice that we've all talked about, because at the minute, from a return on investment point of view, there might be better options in Europe than there are here unless we broaden out the opportunity for those to have a role.
Great, and I actually don't think Richard's question on solar was answered, so perhaps, Kelly, you might want to come in.
I'm curious, Richard, first of all, lovely Northern Irish accent, really appreciate that. You don't hear it often over here. And then secondly, just on solar, what do you mean when the perception of solar?
So historically, if you had solar, you generate it during the day, most of your loads are in the evening. Historically with solar, you generate it during the day, most of your loads are in the evening. Secondly, panel efficiency has come on quite drastically, as with the cost of those panels coming down. With the smart battery technology, with the likes of UK manufacturers of smart battery technology, they can efficiently manage the loads where you charge your battery during the day, excess generation gives you free hot water with a smart eddy, for instance, and then in the evening time you use your battery, and with smart tariffs from E.ON and also with Octopus, who have invested a lot in their technology at the minute. A lot of consumers, whenever electricity prices have been going through the roof, they've actually been earning more money than ever by getting paid up to £2 per kilowatt to charge their battery. And I just think whenever you have those technologies working together, solar makes a lot more sense. And micro generation, I think, is something that needs to be considered.
So that is a very niche understanding of how it all works, which the public will not have. And that kind of, so even just base communication the public don't have en masse. So I think there's a huge amount of effort that needs to be put in by government and others, including energy providers, to help the public understand how it works, what it is, because that is the second top reason why people haven't invested.
Great. Let's just take final questions, because I'm very conscious of time and people are leaving to go to other events. So we'll have this lady here, and I do have a question from the live stream as well.
Hi, my name is Lydia Smith. I am from Battle and Spen constituency. I'd like to ask anyone on this distinguished panel if you do actually know the real cost of installing a heat pump, how much does a heat pump cost, and how much do you need to spend for cavity insulation?
Okay, I'm going to test knowledge in a second. And any other questions from the floor? Okay, I'll take a question from the live stream from an anonymous person, hopefully not the chief whip, Jerome. So for hot air heating houses, what solution is proposed? Those houses are not designed for radiators, and the cost of change to heat pumps and visual internal impact is prohibitive. Andy, perhaps I'll come to you first.
So I'll talk to the real cost of installing a heat pump. As I say, we've looked at it through the lens of the sector that we serve, which is off-gas grid, and we've divided that up into different archetypes, and within probably the most prevalent archetype in off-gas grid, which is a pre-1949 detached house, there is an awful lot of them. The cost that we've looked at there, using Bayes estimates, which I think, Guy, you alluded to, that they are not always realistic, that comes to over £30,000. So over £30,000 for installation of a heat pump, plus all of the retrofit work for a house that hasn't had a huge amount done to it in the first place. So it is significant, and there's no grant mechanism, whether it's means tested or not, that will cover all of that. That's one of the archetypes. There are differences. I think the trouble is that there's such a wide variety, it's difficult to come out with one number, but that's a number that we are worried about with in off-grid in some of the older, bigger properties.
Jerome?
Yes, so the accurate answer is every house is different, and so it's uniquely different. But the evidence that we've had in the Environmental Audit Select Committee was that with retrofitting, the cost of installation on average is about £22,000. That was taken from a housing association which has done several hundred of these installations already, and so it's real data. If you talk to the industry, and I've got heat pump installers in my constituency, I went and visited them 3 weeks ago to find out what their view was. You've got the piece of kit, which is part of the cost, but actually it's whether you need to increase the size of your radiators, whether you've got to move from micro bore to fatter piping, all that, it can add up very significantly. If you've got a straightforward, very straightforward installation, it can be sort of £8,000 to £12,000 at the very bottom end, but then it can go a lot higher.
Guy?
So, I mean, the variety is actually, funny enough, there's an email just dropped into my, which I haven't read, which just dropped in about my own home and how much it's going to cost. So I haven't looked at it yet.
Go on.
But the variety is huge. There will be some houses which are heat pump ready, right? They're going to need no adjustment. That's quite a significant number. I think our work would suggest it's kind of 20%, 25%, where you're not going to need any upgrades. And then if you start getting into kind of a few radiator changes, etc., it will do. But there'll be a long tail of very difficult houses. So. And there are people in the market who say they're going to be able to get the cost of heat pumps down to the equivalent of a boiler installation at the moment. But they're going to need policy to do it. Otherwise they're not going to do it. I would say you have a whole European market where heat pumps are the dominant technology. And it's not because Europeans are much richer than we are. It's because they've got the supply chain sorted and they've got used to it, and they get the financing right and all those kind of issues. So again, but it's got to be desirable. It's got to be attractive to the consumer. It's got to be something people want. I mean, if you look at double glazing, which is an industry which doesn't need any government subsidy at all, the energy paybacks are absolutely rubbish. It takes 20 years in terms of saved energy costs to deliver it. But people want it for other reasons, for security, for noise, etc. Can that work with heating? Well, if you give people a better heating experience, back to the point I was trying to make, which is often people's heating experience is not great at the moment, then actually people will be willing to pay a bit more, but they'll be willing to pay perhaps a bit more, not some of the very significant numbers that we've talked about. So again, there's a good role for government in fixing that.
Kelly, I don't know if you had final thoughts, particularly around costs.
No, it's still the top issue and will be the top issue, so I don't think we should labour costs anymore, especially if you're hoping to see a change, Ryan.
Emma, any final thoughts from you?
I memean, I think that basically the government strategy on this is dependent on price parity, right? So we're only going to get there once, as Guy was saying, they are seen as an affordable and attractive alternative. So that transition is only just starting, and I think the problem we're having is that we are having to have this conversation at this part of the transition in the industry and in the market.
Great, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. This are we in the morning or the afternoon? I don't know. We're doing so many events. I've lost track of time. And just to say that on the chairs are some goodie bags. Our flyer is there. Please do come to some more of our fringe events. The next one is at 1 p.m. On net zero. Lots of environment events, very popular. And that's outside the secure zone inside by Melia, which is a hotel very close to here. So please do join us for that at 1 p.m. where we'll be talking about the opportunities and costs from the net zero transition. I should also say that if you'd like to become a member of Bright Blue, you can do. We've got a special £10 offer at the moment. Please see Anvar or Rebecca at the back if you're interested in doing that. And then a final thanks to Bright Blue team, but in particular to Calor Gas for partnering with us on this event. And thank you. A big round of applause, please, to the speakers. Thank you very much.